Dead America, the Second Month, The Texas Panhandle, Part 1. Written by Derek Slayton. Narrated by Aaron Smith. Chapter 1. Rebuild Day 12. Day 0 plus 42. The sun peeked through the blinds of the cramped office trailer, illuminating the desks and now meaningless paperwork strewn about them. The light was enough to pierce Jackie's closed eyes, and she groaned, raking her nails through her faded purple hair. She hadn't been getting a very good rest on the floor anyway, but it was better than the previous few weeks she'd spent out in the middle of nowhere. After her close encounter on the night all of this end-of-the-world madness began, Jackie had fled civilization with her bass player Ethan and the sound guy from the bar they'd been scheduled to play at, Alonzo. She glanced over at their sleeping forms, the light not fazing them in the slightest. She sighed, sitting up. There was a calendar on the wall that still said October. She couldn't remember if this had all happened in October or November. She tried to think back, but it just wouldn't come. Jackie shook her head in frustration, realizing she didn't even know what month it currently was. She assumed it was getting close to December because the weather was getting cold, a fact made painfully clear as the blanket that had been covering her slid down to her waist. She chuckled in spite of herself as she pulled the blanket back up, wrapping it tightly around her. The date didn't matter anymore. No tour dates to get to, no bills coming due. No family events that she had to come up with an excuse to miss. The only thing that mattered now was living another day. This sounded great in theory, but it was becoming more and more difficult. They were under constant threat of attack from those undead things, which was why they'd had to leave their camping spot in the middle of nowhere and come to the relative comfort of this office shed. Luckily, the family that had already staked claim to it, the Connors, were nice enough people. Betty, Carl, and their teenage son Ed had been hesitant at first, but once they realized they didn't have to share food, they were okay, even welcoming to the extra people. Walking corpses weren't the only threat out there. Jackie finally pulled herself up, walking as quietly as she could across the office to their stash of food, if you could call it that. The portions were running low, maybe a couple days' worth left. The water was plentiful at least, with the snow the previous week allowing them to refill every single bottle they had. It wasn't the greatest tasting water, but it was better than nothing. Jackie cracked open a bottle and drank some. Only an eighth, though, knowing that one a day was all she would get until they were able to find a sustainable source. Alonzo's eyes fluttered open and he gazed up at her. "Up early again, huh?" he asked softly. "Yeah, no matter how hard I try, as soon as the sun comes up, I'm up with it," Jackie replied, keeping her voice down so they wouldn't disturb Ethan. Alonzo sat up with a groan. "How the hell did you survive being in a touring band?" he asked. "3 things, she replied, holding up her fingers. "Drugs, energy drinks." She paused, thinking for a moment. "And drugs." He chuckled. "Yeah, that'll get it done all right," he said, and got up, heading over to her. Jackie held out his bottle of water and rummaged around for an energy bar, and he accepted both gratefully, settling in next to her to eat their breakfast. Ethan's soft snores overpowered the sound of their chewing, and Alonzo chuckled. "Like a chainsaw through a steel beam," he joked. "No wonder those things found us the other day. Like a homing beacon." Jackie laughed but shook her head. "We needed to move on anyway," she pointed out, sobering a little as she motioned to the dwindling food supplies. "A couple more days and we'd be going hungry." "Still, it would have been nice to move along without the fight," Alonzo said. She smirked. "Don't worry, sweetheart. If we run into any more of those things, I'll kick their asses for you," she promised. "Oh, it's like that, is it?" he asked dryly. She cocked a brow. You keep complaining, and yeah, it's like that, she shot back. Ethan let out another loud snore, and Alonzo motioned over his shoulder as he finished off his energy bar. Come on, let's go see if the Connors need anything this morning, he said. The two of them walked out of the trailer, carefully securing the door behind them. The compound was small, 4 trailers and a small parking lot. The only vehicles inside were their van and the Connors' truck. They didn't worry about anything getting inside, as they were within a gated area that was locked. As soon as they stepped out, moans echoed from their right. 2 creatures pressed up against the chain-link fence, gnashing their teeth and groaning as they caught sight of their potential prey. I'll take care of these guys and catch up after, Jackie offered. You sure? Alonzo asked. She nodded. Yeah, I got a kink in my shoulder I need to work out anyway, she replied. All right, I'll see you in a minute, he said with a smile. Jackie walked over to the fence, reaching down into her boot and pulling out a knife as she moved. She stopped a few yards away, getting a good look at the monsters. Well, let's see who we have today, she murmured, and inspected the 2 agitated corpses. Both of them looked like farmhands, missing chunks of flesh and covered in caked blood not only on their clothes, but around their mouths as well. Looks like you had a bit of mixed luck there, fellas, she cooed. Somebody got to feast on you, but looks like you got a meal of your own. Not a bad run, but I'm afraid this is as far as you go. She stepped up, jamming the blade through the fence, taking a zombie out. It slumped to the ground in a heap, its partner not noticing or caring that its companion was dead. She lined up the next shot, a quick jab to the forehead, and with the threat eliminated, she took a moment to scan the area, finding nothing but empty space. As she walked back to the trailer, Alonzo came towards her carrying the Connors' hunting rifle. Everything okay? Jackie asked, stopping in her tracks. He nodded. Yeah, Ed's knee has given him some trouble this morning, he explained. I offered to do the sweep. He trailed off, waiting, eyes expectant. Jackie knew he was giving her space to offer to join him, and instead stared him down. She crossed her arms, tapping her foot lightly, perfectly calm in the standoff until he finally sighed and threw up an arm. Okay, fine, he scoffed. Would you mind accompanying me on the sweep? She raised her chin, triumphant. What's in it for me? She asked. My undying gratitude? He asked. Jackie shook her head. Nope, sorry. You already pawned that off last week when you asked me to take out that zombie that got trapped in a hole, she said. Damn, Alonzo murmured. Okay, let me think. He tapped his chin and then snapped his fingers, eyes brightening. Okay, how about... He cut himself off, pursing his lips. Wait, no, that wouldn't do you any good. Jackie cocked her head. I'll bite, she admitted. What were you going to offer? I remembered that I had some punk vinyl from the early 80s, he said. But seeing as we have no way of getting to it or using it, I don't think you'd be into... I'll take it, Jackie cut in. He blinked at her in confusion. You will? He asked. I mean, of course I was going to go on the sweep with you, she said with a smirk. Nobody goes out alone. But it's nice to know I have something to hang over your head for the next year or 6 while we wait for the zombie threat to go away. Alonzo wrinkled his nose. So, you're one of those long memory types, huh? He asked. Oh, absolutely, she replied with a wide grin. And if you think you're getting out of it by dying, then you should be aware I have an afterlife list, too. Good to know, he said, shaking his head with a chuckle and motioning to the gate. Come on, let's go see what we can see. They walked towards the gate, and Alonzo pulled out a set of keys and unlocked the padlock. Both groups had a key to the lock, but the morning and evening sweeps were the only time they were ever used. The rest of the time the little compound was locked up tight. Once they'd gotten to the other side of the fence, they put the lock back inside, leaving it unlocked. If they were in a hurry to get back, the last thing they wanted to worry about was fumbling around for a set of keys. The sweep was nothing more than a sweep around the compound. The fence ran up against the side of a significant rock formation that stuck up 50 yards or so, with a fairly gentle graded hill on the side to get up top. The front of the compound faced the main road that went from Amarillo to the town of Dumas, which was the largest place between Amarillo and the Oklahoma border, about 50 or 60 miles to the north. On either side of them was nothing but open desert space. They walked towards the start of the hill before climbing up, taking their time since they didn't really have much else to do that day. "So, any ideas on where we should make a play for food?" Jackie asked. Alonzo shook his head. "I was thinking Dumas initially, until Carl told me about what they escaped from," he admitted. "Town isn't that big, like 14 or 15,000, but it's going to be way more than we can handle with no weapons to speak of." "Okay, so that's where we're not going," Jackie agreed. "Where are we going, then?" "Dalhart, maybe," Alonzo suggested. "It's about 40, 50 miles to the northwest of here. Pretty isolated and small." "How small we talking?" Jackie asked. He tilted his head back and forth. "Smaller than Dumas," he said, "but probably bigger than what we're going to want to deal with." "Not liking these options," she muttered. "We can ask Carl and Betty if they can suggest a place," he said. "Gotta be some small towns, maybe a farm we can check out. Surely there's got to be food around here." Jackie took a deep breath. "And if there's not?" she asked. "Ethan looks like he'd fry up nice," he teased, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. She glared at him. "I know he's your friend. I'm sorry," Alonzo said with a laugh, raising his palms. "Frying him up?" she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "A meaty boy like that you gotta slow roast. Crock-pot him. Let those juices stew a bit. Don't want to lose that tenderness." They broke into companionable laughter as they continued to climb, finally reaching the top of the hill. They looked straight down over the edge of the compound, seeing nothing around it for at least a quarter mile. As they scanned the horizon, Jackie used her eyes, but Alonzo had a scope. She scanned as best she could, but ultimately couldn't see all that much. "I see a few stragglers way out there," she said. "Probably don't even know we're here." She glanced at her companion, but he stood stock still, gripping the rifle tightly. "What is it?" she asked, unused to the deathly serious tightening of his muscles. He didn't answer, still staring through the scope, body quivering the slightest bit. Jackie's heart rate peaked, and she smacked him on the shoulder to get his attention. "What is it, Alonzo?" she demanded. Still, he didn't speak, but he lowered the gun, holding it out to her, pointing into the distance with a bewildered and hopeless look in his eyes. She took the rifle, suddenly hesitant, not sure she wanted to see. She raised the scope and peered through it, her gut dropping to the ground. "Fuck me," she breathed, the rifle falling to her side. "There's got to be—" Her voice choked off. "Thousands of them," Alonzo said hoarsely. "All marching our way." Jackie shook herself, taking a deep breath and raising the gun again. She scanned the road, doing a bit of mental math. "We have an hour, maybe 2 before they get to us," she said. "We need to be gone by then." "But to where?" Alonzo asked with a helpless shrug. "Anywhere but here," she snapped. "Come on, we gotta get the others." She led him back down the hill at a run, pumping her legs hard now that they were officially on the clock. Chapter 2. Everyone moved quickly, trying to get the vehicles packed up before the mob made it impossible for them to leave. Ethan grabbed the water and food they had left, pushing it into the van as Alonzo put their sleeping gear inside. Jackie, meanwhile, walked over to the Connors, who were doing the same mad scramble. "Hey, Carl, you got a minute?" she asked the redneck. He turned his frumpy but solid body towards her. "Gonna have to make it quick," he said gruffly. "I will," she replied. "I just need your advice on where to go from here. We don't know the area, and we desperately need food." Carl glanced back at his wife and son, waving a hand at the latter. "Ed, grab me 3 packs," he said.
"Carl?"
Betty asked shrilly.
"These kids are gonna starve if we don't help them,"
the redneck snapped.
"We got plenty, and we got more back at the shop. We'll be all right. Now, boy, do what I said."
Ed nodded and pulled 3 bags out of their stash, bringing them over and holding them out. Jackie took them with a soft smile.
"These are full-day MREs,"
Carl explained as his son held them out.
"So you got a hot breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They're calorie-packed, so as long as you ain't overextending yourself, you should be able to do a meal a day and get away with it. That'll buy y'all a few more days."
Jackie nodded gratefully.
"Thank you," she said. "You are too kind."
"Just wouldn't feel right sending y'all out ill-prepared, you know,"
the redneck replied. She motioned behind her.
"If you need help clearing your shop, we're more than willing to."
Carl put up a hand to stop her speaking.
"I appreciate the offer, but while I'm happy to help y'all out like this, and by letting you into this little compound here, at the end of the day, I don't really know y'all," he drawled. "Don't get me wrong, I don't think y'all would do anything untoward, but I can't take that chance with my family. We're gonna clear out that shop, then head north to Oklahoma. Betty's got some kin up there, and we're gonna try and make it up to find them. They're not exactly friendly to outsiders. Hell, they took a shot at me the first time I met them."
Jackie nodded.
"I understand," she said. "You've already done more than enough for us."
"Now, as far as where to go,"
he continued, shaking his head,
"I'd head up towards Dalhart. About 8,000 people up there, so they got a grocery store and plenty of houses to go through, assuming, of course, they didn't make it. Outside of that, there's nothing but farmland from here to the Oklahoma and New Mexico borders. If you strike out in Dalhart, all you can do is pick a direction and hope."
Jackie nodded and extended her free hand, shuffling the MREs to the other arm.
"Good luck, Carl," she said firmly.
He shook and nodded.
"You too, Jackie."
He waved to the boys as he got into his truck behind his family. Alonzo jogged over and unlocked the gate, opening it for them. Carl drove out and Alonzo closed it behind him before approaching Jackie, eyebrow raised.
"What did old Carl have to say?"
he asked. She shook her head.
"Not much, just gave us 3 more days' worth of food and said to head up towards Dalhart," she said.
"And if that doesn't pan out?" Ethan asked as he walked up. She sighed.
"Then he said pick a direction and good luck," she said dryly.
"Not the most encouraging thing I've ever heard," Alonzo muttered.
"Why wouldn't he let us go with them?"
Ethan asked, crossing his arms. "Because we're a punk band with a black sound guy in the rural Panhandle," Alonzo quipped. "Let's just be thankful they didn't shoot at us as soon as we pulled up." Ethan snorted.
"Fair enough," he said. "I don't blame him, though," Jackie cut in. "I wouldn't trust us either. He said something about going to their shop, then headed up to Oklahoma."
"What kind of shop?" Alonzo asked.
"No clue," Jackie admitted. "He said they had more of these, but didn't say anything else."
She held up the MRE and wiggled it before dropping her arm.
"It's a moot point, though. We're not with them anymore."
"Well, if we don't hit the road soon, the only thing we're going to be is stuck here," Ethan said. "So, you want to get a move on?" "You drive, and I'll navigate," Alonzo offered.
Jackie nodded.
"Get the gate and I'll pick you up," she instructed.
He opened it once again, waiting for her to drive through before locking it up. They weren't sure if they'd ever need it again, but having a safe house seemed like a smart idea in the apocalypse. He hopped into the passenger seat and Jackie took off.
"Turn left," he said.
She slammed on the brakes and stared at him incredulously.
"So I shouldn't drive straight towards the zombie mob?" she asked,
sarcasm evident in her tone. Alonzo wrinkled his nose sheepishly.
"Sorry," he drawled. "I take my job seriously."
She rolled her eyes.
"I can see that,"
she snapped and shook her head before making the turn. Chapter 3. Jackie drove the van down the highway towards Dalhart, finding it a mess. There were cars on the side of the road, seemingly out of gas or just abandoned. There were also a large number of bodies strewn about, both in the fields and on the road. She carefully drove around them as Alonzo let out a low whistle.
"Some shit went down here, man,"
he murmured as they passed a sign reading Dalhart, 2 miles.
"What's that up there?"
Ethan asked, leaning forward from the back seat to point up the road a ways to their left. There was a makeshift fence set up that ran from the road, connecting to the end of a train. The tracks were a good 10 yards from the highway, and they stared as Jackie continued to drive slowly. The gaps underneath the cars had been blocked off with various things. Some had cars parked in front of them, others were stuffed with hay bales. Some had sheet metal fastened to them.
"I think it's safe to say someone was alive in town there," Jackie said. "I doubt they did this before the apocalypse."
They continued their drive, and it was the same story for the next mile. The entire length of the train was like that, creating a fortress around the outskirts of town. There were cars and bodies still along the highway, but they were getting thinner as they got closer to the town limits. As they stared in amazement at the work that had been done, a shot rang out, pinging off the side of the van, causing Jackie to swerve. Rather than floor it, she slammed on the brakes.
"What are you doing?"
Alonzo demanded.
"I got 1/10 of a tank of gas," Jackie snapped. "We aren't getting very far, so we might as well try and reason with them."
"I'll be in the van,"
Ethan said shrilly.
"Get your ass out now, all of us,"
Jackie instructed firmly. She stared down Alonzo, and he nodded in acquiescence. If they ran, they'd get shot at even more, and they couldn't outrun them. This was the right play.
"Hope they're friendly,"
he huffed. Jackie got out, hands first, keeping them high in the air. The others followed her, and the 3 of them walked to the front of the van.
"We're harmless," she called loudly. "So how about instead of shooting at us, you come have a chat?"
They looked along the top of the trains, not finding anything, until a whistle pierced the air and they finally spotted a cowboy holding a hunting rifle. Jackie gave him a friendly little wave. The cowboy frowned, seemingly unimpressed.
"You might as well just turn around and head on home," he said.
"I'm about 800 miles from home, so doubt I'm making that on the fumes left in the van here," she quipped.
"Not my problem,"
he shot back.
"Town's closed."
Jackie sighed, widening her feminine eyes.
"Look, man, we just need a place to crash for a bit," she said.
"Again, not my problem,"
the cowboy replied. She growled under her breath, and Alonzo let out a soft noise as if to tell her to keep her cool.
"So, what is your problem exactly?" she asked.
"My problem is you biker assholes trying to kill me and my friends,"
the cowboy snarled. Jackie dropped her hands and put them on her hips, rolling her eyes.
"Well, that explains why you shoot the way you do. You're clearly blind as a motherfucker," she drawled.
Jackie,"
Alonzo hissed.
"Not now, I'm rolling,"
she threw back over her shoulder. Alonzo hung his head, though keeping his hands in the air, resigned to death by the punk rocker's sass.
"Do we really look like we belong to a biker gang to you?"
Jackie called, motioning to herself.
"Especially from up around these parts? I'm a punk rock singer. Ethan here hasn't ridden a bike since he was in grade school, and Alonzo's so uncoordinated he can't even drive the van, let alone a bike."
The cowboy narrowed his eyes.
"Well..."
"And if we're going to launch an attack on you, don't you think we'd, I don't know, be a little incognito?"
she continued, throwing up her hands.
"Probably not rolling up Main Street here in a beat-up van that you can see and hear from miles away. Plus, the only weapon I have is my smart-ass mouth."
Ethan snickered from behind her, and Alonzo only sighed. The cowboy paused, thinking for a moment, then finally lowered his rifle and pulled out a walkie-talkie.
"You stay right there, where I can see you," he warned. "I'll call it in."
"You do that,"
Jackie quipped, and then turned to the boys who were staring at her, varying degrees of shock.
"What in the holy hell is wrong with you, girl?"
Alonzo gasped. She scoffed.
"I haven't eaten a full meal in a week, so I'm cranky and my ability to deal with rampant stupidity couldn't fill a thimble," she said. They eyed the cowboy as he made his call, and finally he motioned to them.
Okay, get in your van and drive about a mile or so down the road, he instructed. You'll pass some fast food joints. Then, on your left at the bottom of a hill, you'll see an underpass that's blocked off. Chet will meet you there.
Jackie gave a little faux curtsy. Thank you, sir, she said. He tipped his hat, and they got back into the van, speeding off towards the meeting spot. They noticed a few more shooters on top of the trains, but only about every half mile or so. Even when they could see buildings, they couldn't see as many people, but the train stretched the entire length of the road, blocking off the town. No shortage of trains up here, man, Ethan said. The fast food joints on the other side of the road all sat wide open, abandoned and probably looted. The front windows were shattered right out, as if something horrible had gone down, which it probably had. Something horrible had gone down everywhere. As they started rolling down the hill towards the underpass, Jackie spotted someone at the top of the bridge waving at them. She pulled over to the side of the road. There was a 2-lane road running underneath the bridge, which had a train sitting on top of it. The barricade was filled with 3 cars that had been wedged in side by side, with tall sheet metal that extended up 7 feet from the ground, leaving 4 feet or so between the top and the bridge. As they emerged from the vehicle, a couple of guys appeared at the top of the barricade, lowering a ladder down. Should we get our stuff? Ethan asked. Jackie shook her head. We know where we're parked, she said. Come on, let's go meet the locals. They walked over to the ladder, and a tall cowboy officer climbed down to greet them. He looked to be in his early 30s, and built, but almost comically shiny, as if he'd stepped out of a country and western magazine. You must be the newcomers that Buddy called in about, he drawled. Jackie pursed her lips. You mean the newcomers that old Buddy took a shot at? She corrected. Yeah, sorry about that, the cowboy said. Buddy can be a little trigger-happy these days. Jackie rolled her eyes. The perfect quality for the town greeter, she said. With what we've been dealing with of late, yeah, he is perfect, Chet said firmly. Sorry he scared y'all, but if you were in his shoes, you would have done the exact same thing. But where are my manners? I'm Chet, the town sheriff. Jackie extended a hand. I'm Jackie, this is Alonzo and Ethan, she said. Chet shook her hand, and then the boys in turn. It's good to meet y'all, he said. Allow me to welcome you to Dalhart. He waved towards the ladder behind them. Why don't you come on in, and I'll give you the nickel tour. The 4 of them clambered over the barricade, reaching the ground. They looked down at the street, which was red brick instead of typical asphalt. Huh, that's fun, Ethan said, towing the grout. Town's been here since 1901, Chet explained. They built these streets to last back then. With any luck, they'll still be standing 100 years from now. Alonzo sighed. No doubt, he muttered. Now just have to hope there's someone left around to appreciate it. Come on, let me take you up to the courthouse, Chet said. Mayor Collier will want to meet you. The group followed him down the main street, which was filled with shops on either side of the road. The typical small-town downtown area was closed for business, with the shops locked up, some of the broken windows boarded up. There were only a small handful of people walking around, no more than 5 or 6. Jackie took a deep breath. If you don't mind me asking, where is everybody? She asked, waving a hand in the air. Or is this it? Yeah, I thought this town was like 8,000 or 9,000 people, Alonzo added. Everybody run away? Chet stiffened. Not so much, he said. We got hit hard, harder than most, at the start of all this. Lost a lot of good people. Ethan shook his head. How though? He asked. This town's in the middle of nowhere. I would have thought you would have had time before the infection spread up here. We're a crossroads town, Chet explained. So, if you're moving goods by truck from Dallas, Austin, or San Antonio and want to get to Denver or the Northeast, the highway to get you there runs right through town. From what we heard before everything went offline, this mess started in Austin and spread. One trucker coming through town was all it would take to infect just about everybody. And it took out everybody? Jackie asked, eyebrows rising. Chet nodded. "About 90% of the town," he said solemnly. "Most of those who are left are out at a few of the farms, making sure we have food long term. It's a skeleton crew here in town. Not that there's much to do here with the trains. Gotta say, that is pretty ingenious the way you use those to block the town off," Alonzo said, jerking a thumb over his shoulder. "Where the hell did you find all those anyway?" "We have a small depot up here," Chet explained. "A lot of the farms load their goods up and ship them out. Just so happened that we had a few roll in at the start of all this, so we put them to good use. It's not perfect, mind you, but it's enough to block off the main road so we don't get stragglers shambling in. Doesn't do much for the live ones, though." He trailed off, eyes glazing over, as if he were remembering something difficult. "You okay, Sheriff?" Jackie asked. He took a deep breath, snapping out of it. "Yeah," he said, forcing a smile. "Just been some troubles as of late." They arrived at the courthouse, a large stone building that looked like it had been there since the founding of the town over a century ago. "Come on, mayor's just inside," Chet said, leading the group up the large stone steps and into the building, which was quite warm. "Oh, that feels good," Ethan moaned, running his hands up and down his arms. "Yeah, radiator system is still running hot," the sheriff replied. "Better than freezing, though." He led them up another flight of stairs and into a big courtroom. There was plenty of light thanks to the large windows and a few people scattered about, working at desks. In the center of the room stood an older man that looked to be in his 60s. He had a look of bewilderment on his face, one that seemed etched into his face permanently. "Hey, Mayor Collier, we have some visitors," Chet greeted. "This is Jackie, Alonzo, and Ethan." The mayor looked up from his desk, the expression not faltering, even as he straightened his jacket.
Hey there! Welcome to our little slice of heaven, right here in Texas," he said brightly, though his tone didn't match his tense posture. "What brings y'all to our neck of the woods?"
"Well, we've been hiding out in the desert for the last few weeks since all this started," Jackie explained, waving a hand around her head. "We spent the last few days hanging out with the Connors from Dumas in this little construction zone. Got forced out this morning because there were a few thousand zombies coming up the road from Amarillo." The mayor and Chet exchanged a look when she mentioned the Connors, and didn't break it for so long that Jackie noticed. "Something I said?" she asked dryly.
"Do you think it's them?"
the mayor asked hoarsely. "What were the Connors' names?" Chet asked, turning to Jackie, eyes hard. She shrugged. "It was Carl, Betty, and their son Ed," she replied slowly. They looked at each other again, this time smiling. "Am I missing something?" she asked.
"Did they say where they were going when they took off this morning?"
the mayor asked, voice rising with excitement. Jackie shrugged again. "Yeah, something about he was going to his shop before heading up to Oklahoma to find Betty's family," she said impatiently. "Now you want to clue me in before you continue to interrogate me?" "Sorry about the third degree there," Chet said, waving his hands back and forth in front of his face. "It's just a really good sign. You see, Carl owned the gun shop, which was right in the middle of downtown, just off the highway. Biggest selection of weapons and ammo between here and Amarillo." Jackie blinked at them. "Okay," she prompted. "We've had some scouts go to Dumas over the last few weeks, and that entire place is overrun with those things," Chet explained. "If Carl was with you and headed to his shop, it means there's a really good chance the stuff inside his shop is still there.
And, based on what the scouts said on their last trip, it's doubtful old Carl was able to get to the shop," the mayor added.
Jackie shook her head incredulously. "Are you maniacs thinking about doing a raid?" she asked.
"If we want to stand a chance against the Knights of Dumas, we have to," the mayor said solemnly.
Jackie shared confused glances with her companions, and Alonzo raised his hand. "I'm sorry, the Knights of Dumas?" he asked. "What, is the Renaissance Fair in town?" The mayor shook his head.
"I wish it was that harmless," he said.
"The Knights of Dumas are a motorcycle gang," Chet explained. A very violent one that isn't exactly thrilled with our little town here." Jackie shrugged. "Why not?" she asked. "Other than the obvious fact that we have food and medicine, our prison has their leader, Axton," Chet replied. Alonzo's brow furrowed. "If that's what they're mad about, why not turn him loose?" he suggested. "Or hell, why didn't you just pop him in the head and call it a day when you captured him? Not like the feds are going to come in and bring you up on cruel and unusual punishment charges. This is the apocalypse, after all." "Not that easy, I'm afraid," Chet replied, shaking his head slowly. "Axton has been our guest at the state prison here in town since the summertime. He got convicted on some lesser charges after an informant dropped a dime on him, and now he's waiting on his day in court on multiple felonies. Murder, extortion, kidnapping, and a whole host of other fun stuff. Once the initial influx of running zombies subsided, the Knights decided to pay our town a visit, trying to bust him out. It was, bloody. Lost a lot of good people that night." "But you turned them away," Ethan said. Chet took a deep breath. "At the expense of most of our ammunition," he explained. "And worse, they know it. By the time the sun was coming up, our guys were fighting hand-to-hand with them. They haven't tried another full frontal assault yet, just popping off shots from a distance at the guys on the trains. It's only a matter of time, especially with their new leader, Apollo." Alonzo wrinkled his nose. "Somehow I doubt his parents gave him that name," he said dryly. "He was their third in command when Axton was arrested," Chet continued. "Their new leader was tight with Axton, and we took him out during the raid. Apollo is a different beast, though. Very violent, and not a fan of Axton either." Ethan shook his head in confusion. "If he's not a fan of Axton, then why would they come back into town?" he asked. "Bloodlust, mostly," Chet replied. "He enjoyed roughing people up back in the pre-apocalypse days. Now he's been unleashed. Plus, we have food and Axton, who I have no doubt he'd like to take out to firmly solidify his place at the top of the Knights' food chain." "So we go get the ammo, then," Jackie cut in. "Make sure they don't get it and lock this place down." Chet shook his head helplessly. "It's not that easy," he said. "There's hundreds of those things in the downtown area alone, and thousands more spread out in the town. It's a suicide run just to get to Main Street, and then there's no way to get to the gun store." "What about the mob that's coming up from Amarillo?" she asked. The mayor's brow furrowed. "What about it?" he asked. "Might be big enough to unclog the downtown area," Jackie replied with a shrug. "The line looked big enough to keep pushing forward, which might get the stragglers to move." There was a short moment of silence before the mayor nodded slowly. "That could work," he said. Chet shook his head. "They just get stuck in cactus," he said. Ethan blinked at him. "Get stuck on a cactus?" he asked. "In cactus," Chet corrected. "It's a tiny town just to the north of Dumas on the highway. There's an overturned transport truck and a huge pile-up blocking the highway. If that line is as big as you say it is, then they'll hit the roadblock and start shuffling back towards Dumas the first time one of them sees or hears anything to the south." Jackie shrugged. "So we remove the roadblock," she said simply. Alonzo shook his head in shock. "You just want to push an overturned truck off the road?" he asked. "There's got to be something up there that can do it," she replied. "Couple of big-ass trucks should be able to handle it, and it's not like there's a shortage of those things up here. We don't have to get that thing upright, just slide it off the road." The mayor's eyes widened. "Chet, is it doable?" he asked. Chet nodded slowly. "There were some four-wheel drive trucks in the pile-up. Looked like they were still able to go," he replied. "Just cosmetic damage and trapped by others hitting them. Problem's going to be getting there, and manpower." The mayor motioned to the trio. "Well, we have some new recruits right here," he said. Ethan raised his hands. "I'm a lover, not a fighter," he declared. Jackie cocked a brow. "Let's be honest. You're neither," she quipped. He glared at her for a second, but nodded in agreement, crossing his arms. "Well, we still got two," the mayor said. "So, how we getting out there? Alonzo asked with a sigh. Guessing driving isn't an option? Chet shook his head. The only fuel we have left is to power the generators at the farms, he replied. Not that it would do any good in the vehicles anyway. So what's left? Jackie asked. Bicycles? Looks like we're going horseback, Chet drawled. Alonzo waved his hands in front of his face. Oh, nah, hell no, he sputtered. There is zero chance I'm getting up on a horse. I tried once and broke my collarbone. I'll help out on the trains and beat some wholesale back-a-ass, but I'm not getting up on one of those things. Okay, looks like it's the two of us, Chet, Jackie declared. Don't worry, I got a few others, Chet assured her. Who do you need? The mayor asked. Chet tilted his head back and forth. I was thinking Bo, Zane, and Travis, he said. So, you want every capable man in town under the age of 50 to go with you? The mayor demanded, throwing up his hands. That's all you have here? Jackie asked, blinking at him. I thought there were hundreds of people who survived. We do. They just mostly happen to be past their prime or a little too young to be getting into fights, Chet explained. That's why they're out at the farms. The other capable people we have are vital and can't be risked. But Jackie can? Alonzo asked dryly. Chet jutted out his chin. Yeah, you can, he said firmly. Everybody in this room can, unless you have extensive farming experience and know how to tend and grow a variety of crops, that is. Alonzo sighed. Man, I don't even know how to pick a ripe melon at the grocery store, he admitted. Then you're expendable, just like I am, Chet said, poking his own chest with his thumb. Anybody can be taught how to use a gun, not so much being in charge of a farm, where if something doesn't go right, everybody starves next year. All right, Sheriff, you made your point, Jackie said. When do we leave? He checked his watch and shrugged. We'd better pack up and head out now, he said. Still have a few hours of daylight left. How fast are those horses? She asked. Fast enough to get us to an overnight spot, Chet replied. There's a cotton farm that we've been using as a safe house for when we're out. Should have plenty of time to get there safely and hunker down. Jackie nodded, motioning ahead of her. Okay then, lead the way, she said, and then glanced back at her boys. You two behave while I'm gone, she warned. Don't worry, I'll put them to work, the mayor assured her. Good, she said with a smirk. And don't let them give you any lip either. Be safe, Jackie, Alonzo said, voice firm and with an edge of emotion. She simply nodded and followed Chet out of the room. He pulled out his walkie-talkie as they walked down to the ground floor. Travis, you read me? He asked into the radio. I got you, brother, a male voice came back through. What you need? We're going on a field trip, Chet replied. Grab Bo and Zane, pack up 5 horses and get them to the underpass, ready for overnight trouble. 5? Travis replied. Who else is coming with us? Got a new girl who just got into town, Chet replied. There was a short pause, and then Travis asked, A new girl, huh? My type? Jackie shot Chet a glance, raising an eyebrow as if to warn him to be careful how he answered the question. She'd chew you up and spit you out, Chet said with a smirk, and not in the fun way. Travis barked a laugh through the radio. Looking forward to meeting her then, he said. I'm sure you are, Chet quipped. We'll be there in 5. Copy that, Travis said. Chet led Jackie from the building, walking down towards the rendezvous point. Brother, huh? Jackie asked as she kept pace with him. Actual brother? Or is that just some cowboy slang? He chuckled. Real brother, he said. He a cop too? She asked. He shook his head. Went into machinery, repairing large farm equipment and things of that nature, he explained. Not the most glamorous job, but up in these parts he's never out of work. Well, at least he wasn't before all this. Not a lot of demand to fix machines that don't have fuel to run on. I can understand that, she replied with a nod. I'm a singer in a punk band. Not a lot of demand these days for that. Chet cocked a brow at her. Punk band, huh? He asked. Yep. Jackie and the Deathbringers, she replied, puffing out her chest a little. Well, let's hope you live up to your band name, Chet said solemnly. Because between you and me, we're headed right into the middle of a shitstorm. And that's even if we don't run into any knights. She shrugged. Good times, she drawled. You have a weapon? Chet asked. Jackie reached into her boot, pulling out a small knife. About all I got, she said. He pursed his lips. You know how to use a gun? He asked. She nodded. I am a Texan after all, she said. Just don't ask me to hit anything that's too far away. Let's just hope it doesn't come to that, Chet replied. You more comfortable with a rifle or handgun? Handgun, she replied easily. He reached behind his back, pulling out a handgun from a back holster, checking the mag before slapping it back in and handing it over. You got 10 shots, he said. Make 'em count. Jackie checked the weapon before shoving it into her back waistband. They walked for a few more minutes before getting to the underpass, climbing over the barricade and down to the street below. When they landed, they spotted 3 men sitting on horses, with 2 more empty and waiting for them. A ripped guy that looked like a linebacker sneered down at Jackie.
So, this is the newcomer you want to bring with us?
He asked, disdain clear in his voice. What? She asked, putting a hand on her hip. You afraid you won't be able to keep up with me? He snorted.
Oh, honey.
Let's get something straight right off the bat, she snapped. I'm not honey. I'm not sweetheart. I'm not whatever pet name you have for your best sheep. The name's Jackie. If you feel like pressing your luck, you'd be wise to keep in mind that I've spent the better part of the last 3 years performing in punk rock clubs all across the country. So, if you don't think I've popped the grapes of some guys who thought they could do what they wanted with me, by all means, try me. I'm more than happy to give you a demonstration. She raised her chin. Now, I've spent the last 6 weeks sleeping in a van with no showers or hot food. So if my fuse got any smaller, you'd need an electron microscope to see it. Everybody clear on the current situation? All 3 men on horseback nodded like bobbleheads, echoing, yes, ma'am, at various volumes. I think she's gonna fit right in, Chet, the shortest one said. I'm Bo. That's Travis, and I believe you've already met and scared the shit out of Zane here. Gentlemen, Jackie said, and then cocked her head. Zane? The men all chuckled at the burn as Chet and Jackie got up onto their horses, securing their weapons and packs. We good to go? The former asked. Travis nodded. Got 2 nights' worth of provisions, and we're all armed up, he said. What's the mission? Headed to the cotton farm, Chet explained. I'll fill everybody in once we're there. Let's head out. We're going to be moving at a brisk pace, so keep up. Everybody nodded as Chet led them out of town on the road until they got to the field and could speed up a bit. Jackie remained stone-faced, but inside she was having a mild panic attack. That morning she'd been in the relative safety of the construction compound, and now she was on horseback to go face off against a bunch of dangerous douchebags called the Knights of Dumas. She looked around at the others, finding their faces worn out, even more so than her. Some of them were in bloody clothes, with a couple of small wounds visible on their exposed skin. These men had been through some shit times too, and she realized that comparatively, she'd been extremely fortunate up until this point in the apocalypse. She decided it was well past time to pay her dues. Chapter 4. The 5 members of the makeshift posse rode hard across the barren wastes of the Texas Panhandle. It was all desolate fields, populated with only the occasional rock, cactus, and tumbleweed, was beautiful in its own way. What the landscape lacked, the sky more than made up for. Jackie looked to the west as the sun sat low on the horizon. Beams of light shot up, reflecting off of the clouds in a spectacular display of reds and yellows, brilliantly lit up. Even with all the horror in the world these days, it was nice to see something beautiful remained. "How much further?" Bo called over the noise of the horses. "Just up ahead," Chet called back over his shoulder. They continued to ride for a few more minutes before he slowed them down to a walk.
The farm came into view just on the horizon, flanking a barbed wire fence with a segment cut out that they led their horses through. The walk was about a quarter-mile to the main set of buildings. There were two large ones that looked like machine storage and processing, and a smaller one that looked like an office area. A fire pit sat out front of it, looking like it had been used recently.
"Not your first time up here, huh?" Jackie asked.
While we were getting the fortifications around the town prepped, we had scouts sent out towards any place that might have zombies that would come our way, Bo explained. Zane and I would switch off this run, coming up here and watching the road to Cactus.
"You ever get any trouble?" she asked.
Bo shook his head.
"I spent a week or so up here. Zane, too," he replied. "We saw, 15 of those things between us?"
"If that," Zane confirmed. "Wasn't until I got a wild hair up my ass and went to Cactus to see what the issue was that I saw the pile up on the highway."
Travis rolled his eyes.
"Yep, that's our Zane," he drawled. "There wasn't a problem, so he went looking for one."
"You're surprised?" Chet asked, sounding amused.
"How many bar fights did Bo and I get called out to because of him?"
"What can I say? I get bored easily,"
Zane said with a shrug. Jackie chuckled.
"Town this small, I can see why," she said. "What did you guys do for fun around here anyways?"
"Usually get drunk and get into bar fights," Zane said.
She smirked. "Sounds like I would have fit in here then," she said.
Bo's eyebrows hit his hairline.
"Big into bar fights, are you?"
he asked.
She shrugged. "I've had more than my share," she replied. "Usually win them, too."
"That's good, because we're going to need some of that energy come tomorrow," Chet replied. He pulled his horse up to a makeshift hitching post, hopping off and drawing his handgun. "I'm going to do a quick sweep. Bo, get us a fire going. Zane, take care of the horses. Travis, we're going to need some grub." Jackie raised a hand.
"And me?"
she asked, pointing to herself. "Why don't you come with me?" he asked. "If there's any trouble, I'd like to see what you're made of before going into Cactus tomorrow."
"Fair enough,"
Jackie said as they dismounted and tied up their horses. She drew her knife from her boot and approached Chet.
"You're using your knife?"
he asked, raising a bow.
"We're risking our lives because ammo is in short supply,"
Jackie explained.
"Plus, I'd like to think you know how to use that thing, so if things get too hot, then you can pull us out of the fire."
He thought for a beat, and then shrugged, motioning with his hand. "Ladies first," he invited.
"Oh, such a gentleman,"
she drawled, and led them around the two big buildings towards the back of the farm. There wasn't a zombie in sight, just a beautifully lit sky as they did their stroll.
"I like the way you handled yourself with Zane back there in town," Chet said as they walked. "He's a bit of a hothead, and believes himself to be a ladies' man, but with the way you handled it, I think you got his respect."
She shrugged.
"Don't really care about gaining his respect, if I'm being honest," she admitted. "As long as he carries his weight and doesn't try to get handsy with me, we'll be okay."
"I think you did a good enough job putting the fear of God into him by threatening his grapes," Chet said with a chuckle.
They looked around the back area of the buildings, not finding anything other than more beautiful scenery. "Come on, there's one more building over there we should check out," he said, and the two of them walked in silence, just enjoying the peace and quiet. The moment was broken, however, as they approached the small shed area where moans and thrashing echoed from the back side of it.
"Looks like something found its way in here,"
Jackie murmured. "Not surprising," Chet replied. "Lead the way." Jackie readied her knife, nodding and heading around the back of the shed. As she came around the corner, she was immediately spotted by two zombies who moaned excitedly and shambled towards her. Or at least, they tried to, as they were caught up on some bales of barbed wire that were stuck behind the building. Even though they were not moving that far, Jackie still tread carefully, stepping forward to the first one. She smacked its arms out of the way while delivering a kill shot to its eye socket. As the creature fell, the other one broke free from its barbed shackles, leaving behind a significant amount of flesh in the process. Jackie was ready, hopping back a step to get into striking position, waiting for the ghoul to get within range. Once it was close enough, she stepped forward and jammed her blade into its forehead. She shoved the corpse back onto the barbed wire, leaning down to wipe her blade off on its pants before sheathing it.
"All right, so when's dinner?"
she asked. Chet chuckled and nodded. "No nonsense. I like it," he said approvingly. "Come on. Travis should be getting it going now."
"Can he cook?"
she asked as she caught up to him. "Better than any of us here," Chet replied without missing a beat. Jackie cocked a brow.
"That non-answer doesn't exactly instill me with confidence," she said dryly.
"Given your club-touring past, I can assure you that it will be far from the worst thing you've ever eaten," he promised. She looked at the sky as if contemplating for a moment, and then finally nodded in agreement.
"You're probably right about that," she agreed. "I have some truck stop horror stories that would shake you to your core."
"Even after everything I've witnessed the last 6 weeks or so?" "I don't doubt it," Chet agreed. They shared a laugh as they walked back to the others. The sun vanished behind the horizon, but there was plenty of light thanks to the campfire they'd set up.
"Y'all have any trouble?"
Bo asked.
"Nothing we couldn't handle,"
Jackie replied as she took a seat. Chet snorted. "What's this we stuff?" he asked. "That was all you."
"Good to know you can handle yourself,"
Zane said.
"Be careful there," Travis warned. "She's way more than you can handle."
"I know,"
Zane said, holding up his palms.
"That's why I gave her a compliment and then shut the hell up."
Laughter rippled around the circle as Jackie took a seat on one of the cheap folding chairs that the guys had set up around the campfire. She gave Zane a playful punch on the arm as she got comfortable, seeming to loosen him up a little.
"So, what's on the menu this evening, Mr. Chef?" she asked.
Travis hung a big cast-iron pot over the coals before reaching into his bag and pulling out several large cans of soup.
"Tonight's offerings include a hearty portion of beef-infused vegetable soup," he said with a flourish.
"No wine pairing to accompany it?"
Jackie asked with a soft pout. Zane reached into his bag and pulled out a half bottle of mid-range whiskey.
"May not be wine, but it is a good vintage,"
he said, holding it out. Jackie nodded approvingly as she took the bottle, inspecting it for a few seconds.
"Wouldn't have pegged you for having the budget for a bottle this good," she said.
He grinned, holding up a hand and wiggling all 5 fingers.
"Apocalypse discount,"
he said. Jackie laughed and took a swig, letting out a deep groan of satisfaction at the burn before she put the top back on and looked at the bottle.
"Oh, it has been far too long, my friend,"
she cooed, and passed the bottle to Bo. "So, what's your story?" Travis asked as he cracked open one of the cans and dumped the contents into the cauldron with a plop. "I know you're not local, and I'm pretty sure you didn't have Dalhart circled on your map as a vacation destination." She leaned her elbows on her knees, getting closer to the fire.
"My band was on tour when all this started," she began. "We were making the drive from Austin to Amarillo to play a gig at some downtown dive bar when this shit started. We weren't there 2 minutes before those things started popping up. The bartender, my bass player, and I got lucky and made it back to the van before things got too bad. Rode out most of the first month in the desert before getting to some construction site office. That was fine until the mob headed up from Amarillo caused us to come your way. I mean, as far as apocalypse living goes, I can't complain. I can't imagine what people in major cities were going through."
"Hell, we only had 8,000 people and it nearly wiped us out,"
Zane said.
"Dumas is twice our size, and I don't know hardly anybody who got out. Some place like Austin or Houston would just be an absolute bloodbath."
"Good old Wild Bill said he talked to a few people around the country on his ham radio," Travis said as he dumped the last can into the pot. "He shared a few stories with me a couple weeks back. None of them sounded particularly optimistic."
"Wild Bill?"
Jackie asked, cocking a brow.
"Oh, sorry," Travis replied as he stirred the soup. "He's a long-time Dalhart resident. Helped us set up the train barricade, and I guess you could call him our communications expert." There was some laughter around the campfire, and Chet shook his head. "Not that we have much use for that," he said.
Gas isn't exactly plentiful these days, and we're a bit out of the way. Still, it's nice to hear what's going on outside our community, Travis said. Jackie leaned forward. So, even though the news isn't good, what is the news? She prompted. Well, let's see, he replied thoughtfully. He said that Miami is all but gone. There are a few survivor groups running up the East Coast, though. Oh, and the military made a move on the Northwest. Really? She gasped, blinking at him. What happened? Last I heard, they were making progress in Seattle, but that was a couple of weeks ago, Travis said. Bo glanced at him. Hell, I hadn't heard that, he said. Well, maybe you should start being more neighborly, Travis huffed, feigning offense, and light laughter rippled around the group again as Bo flipped Travis a playful middle finger. So what about you guys? Jackie asked. From Dalhart? Everyone nodded, but it was Chet who spoke up. Yeah, we all grew up together, he said. Can't think of a better way to live than the small-town life.
Who knew all those years of playing soldier would turn into the real thing? Zane asked.
Hell, if I had known this was going to happen, I probably would have spent less time ducking out to go visit your sister and more time working on my tactics, Bo quipped. Zane stiffened.
Wait, what about my sister? He snapped.
Don't tell me you had dibs on her, Jackie cut in, and the boys roared with laughter as Zane glared at her, shaking his head.
Classy, he drawled. You kiss your mother with that mouth?
Jackie smirked. If you ever listened to one of my CDs, you'd know that's the tamest thing to come out of my mouth in years, she said.
I tell you what, you get through this little adventure, okay, and I'll listen to whatever album of yours you want, Zane promised. Not my kind of music for sure, but I'll give it a shot.
Hell, I'll make sure you come out okay as long as you let me watch that, Bo added. That boy thinks country music made after 1987 is too heavy. I want to see his little mind explode when your band kicks in on the headphones.
Headphones?
Zane asked, brow furrowing. Bo nodded. Damn straight, he said easily. I already know I don't like punk music. No offense. Jackie shrugged. None taken, she replied. And I'm not the one trying to impress the new girl, Bo teased. So you're on your own.
Fine. Be a wuss, Zane muttered.
There was more laughter as Travis pulled up the spoon, blowing gently and then taking a tentative sip of the soup, smacking his lips. We good, Travis? Chet asked. If it gets any hotter, it'll be boiling, came the reply. All right, let's eat up so we can get turned in, Chet instructed. Got a busy day tomorrow. Everybody nodded as Travis produced some plastic bowls and began to fill them, handing them out around the circle. Bo passed spoons around and everyone got comfortable, enjoying their nourishment for the evening. Jackie looked around at the cowboys, hope blossoming in her chest that her situation wasn't all that bad, and way better than she thought it would be, given how the day had started. Chapter 5 Day 0 plus 43 The group had been riding for an hour, beginning their journey mere moments after the sun popped up over the horizon. They had a long day ahead of them, and couldn't afford to waste any time. It was just a few miles from the campsite to the small town of Cactus, if you could even call it that. To hear Chet describe it, the town was little more than a few collections of cheap mobile housing that surrounded a downtown area consisting of a few small shops and restaurants. One baby tornado and the entire town would be relocated 5 miles off the highway. As they got close, Chet waved the group down, slowing the horses to a trot before stopping altogether. He let out a quick whistle and Travis pulled out some binoculars, looking ahead towards the town. They were about a half-mile away with a straight shot into the downtown area. 2 mid-sized buildings stood on their side of the road, flanked by empty lots. Across from that were 3 buildings, and to the north, just outside of the last one, there was nothing. No zombies or cars or signs of life. To the south, however, there was a huge mass of bodies, easily 80 to 100 ghouls milling about on the road, Well, so much for getting a good look at it, Travis muttered. Wreck in town? Chet asked. Travis nodded. Yep, he replied. Zane, you got your walkie?
Yeah, what channel you want?
Came the reply as the large cowboy pulled out his radio.
10, Chet replied. 6 is the fallback if we get some eavesdroppers.
Sure,
Zane replied.
What do you want me to do, boss?
North of town looks pretty clear, Chet replied. I want you to get set up there and get eyes on everything. See if the situation looks manageable.
On it,
Zane said.
You got binoculars?
Travis cut in. Zane shook his head.
Hunting rifle scope,
he replied. Travis nodded as the linebacker rode off quickly towards the north of town as everybody else sat and waited. They passed around the binoculars so everybody could look at the situation. Most took a quick look at the pass, but Jackie lingered. She had been fortunate, largely avoiding crowds of ghouls like this. In fact, this was the closest she had been to this many at one time. Fear pulsed through her, and despite her best efforts to hide it, Chet noticed. You good? He asked softly. She nodded, handing the binoculars back without meeting his gaze.
Yeah, I'm good, she said. Just haven't been up close and personal with a group this size before.
Don't worry. If I have anything to say about it, this is as close as you'll ever get to those things, Chet said. Jackie nodded in appreciation, finding it easier than she'd thought to trust the man. They sat there for a few more moments before the radio crackled.
Chet, your copy?
Zane came through. Chet raised the walkie-talkie to his lips. What do you see? He asked.
It's a hell of a mess if I'm being honest.
The reply came dryly. Well, I kind of figured that, Chet drawled, sarcasm evident in his tone. You have some specifics for me, or should I start riding up there myself?
I'm getting to it. Keep your boots on,
Zane grumbled. The others chuckled as they waited for him to continue.
Looks like about a 10-15 car pileup,
Zane reported.
A couple are clear on the sidewalk, a few upside down, but they're all packed together pretty tightly.
And the company? Chet prompted.
They're packed around them, especially the trucks,
Zane said. Chet motioned for the binoculars and Bo handed them over. He looked south of the downtown area at the closest neighborhood, which was just off of the main highway. It was mostly a collection of run-down trailers with some older brick houses near the back of the lot. Okay, Zane, how do you feel about causing a ruckus? He asked into the radio. A laugh came through the speaker.
You've known me for damn near 30 years,
Zane replied.
You know that's my natural state. Hell, I wake up causing a ruckus.
Well, then this should be an easy task for you, Chet said. I need you to get to that neighborhood just to the south of town and start letting everybody know you're there.
Now, wait a damn minute,
Zane came back.
How'd I go from making a ruckus to being bait?
Chet shrugged. Just trying to use your natural talent as best I can, he teased.
Yeah, save it,
Zane replied playfully.
Give me a couple of minutes to get in position. You want a heads up before I start causing trouble?
Knowing you, we should be able to hear it from here when you start, Chet said.
Well, you just be ready to do whatever you're going to do once I pull them my way,
Zane said.
I don't want to be playing hide-and-seek for any longer than absolutely necessary.
Chet nodded. You count on it, he assured him.
I don't want to be out here any longer than absolutely necessary.
All right, stay tuned,
Zane replied, and the line went quiet.
Let me get those specs,
Bo said, holding out his hand, and Chet handed the binoculars over. Bo looked to the south, far beyond the mass of zombies near the pileup.
What are you looking for? Jackie asked. If you've known Zane as long as I have, then you'd know it's a good bet something is going to explode here soon, he said, amusement clear in his tone. Wanted to see what kind of trouble we could expect.
Travis moved his horse up beside his. You thinking the couple of neighborhoods down there? He asked.
Those things aren't that fast, but they can cover half a mile faster than we'd like, Bo replied.
Might be a good idea to get some eyes on them,
Chet agreed. Maybe cause a diversion or two. Can you three handle the traffic jam? Bo asked. Can't be that hard to start up a couple of trucks and shove stuff off the road, Jackie replied with a shrug. I think we can manage. Yeah, what she said, Travis agreed. Okay, I'll head that way and give you a shout with what I see, Bo replied. Just don't leave without me. Travis put a hand over his heart and gasped. Why would you even say something like that? He asked with overdramatic faux offense. Bo cocked a brow. 2007, Johnny's welcome home party in Clayton, he said dryly. Both Travis and Chet let out soft, oh, noises, eyes widening with recognition. Yeah, oh is right, Bo quipped. I still have PTSD flashbacks from that incident. So, like I said, don't go leaving without me. Don't worry, we won't, Chet promised. Bo nodded and rode off towards the south. Jackie turned to the others, eyebrows raised. So, guessing you guys had an interesting night back in '07? The cowboys laughed, clearly more relaxed now that their friend was well out of earshot. Chet and I had fun, Travis said sheepishly. Not sure what happened to Bo could be described as interesting. Well, do tell, Jackie prompted, waving a hand. We got a few minutes anyway. The cowboys exchanged a glance, as if they were silently debating who got to tell the story. Go ahead, brother. Tell the tale, Chet invited. Travis took a deep breath. So, back in the day, Bo wasn't exactly what you'd call a ladies' man, he began. Who, Bo? Jackie mocked playfully. No, you don't say. I know, hard to believe, Travis replied with a chuckle. That night, however, I don't know what got into him, but he seemed determined. Chet raised a hand. I know what got into him, he quipped. It was half a bottle of whiskey. Ah, nature's social lubricant, Jackie added. Whatever it was working, Travis continued. He completely ignored our group and was hitting on this really cute cowgirl at the bar for a solid hour. Well, it came time for us to move on to the next bar, but none of us wanted to interrupt him and spoil his chance. So we snuck out. Even went so far as to send them both a drink. Proper bar courting etiquette on your part, Jackie said. I don't know why he'd be mad at that. Story ain't over yet, Chet warned. A couple hours passed, and it was last call, so we texted him, Travis said. Never heard back, so we all assumed he got lucky and went home. Jackie cocked a brow. I assume that wasn't the case? She asked. Depends on your definition of the word lucky, Chet said. Yeah, so we didn't see Bo for a few days, or hear from him, Travis said, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. It was a long weekend, so we didn't think anything of it. In hindsight, I suppose we should have. But you know how it is. He was a long-suffering squirrel, and he'd finally found a nut. So why not let him enjoy it? Jackie snorted, shaking her head. So what happened? She asked. When he finally did resurface, he shared his tale, which was mixed in with various curses to our names and family trees, Travis replied. To make a long story short, he struck out with the cute cowgirl he was working on. But another stepped up in her place after that, and, how do I put this delicately? Do you listen to much country music? Jackie deadpanned, her glare clearly conveying, are you fucking kidding me? Travis raised his palms to acknowledge the stupidity of his question. Fair enough, he said. Well, there's an old country tune called something like, I got in at 2 with a 10 and woke up at 10 with a 2. Jackie snorted. Okay, yeah, she said, picking up what he was getting at. I've been there. Can't be that bad, though. Maybe when you're on tour and can just hop in the van and drive off the next morning, Travis replied with a grin. Bo wasn't so lucky. See, in these parts, some of the farms are miles away from civilization. He never did say exactly what he said to the young lady the next morning, but it resulted in him having to hide in the pig farm for most of a day before hitchhiking back home. Jackie barked a laugh. Yeah, thank God for tour vans, she said. The other two joined in, but the fun was cut short by a gunshot going off across the way in the neighborhood full of trailers. Looks like Zane's starting up, Chet said. Travis, keep an eye on that mob so we can get moving when it's clear. Travis nodded, pulling out his binoculars. Their jovial mood dropped into serious focus. The workday was about to kick off. Chapter 6. Zane rode his horse to the edge of the neighborhood, taking the long way around to keep his distance from anything that might be interested in a snack. There was a tree about a quarter-mile from the closest trailer that he would hitch his horse to. As he hopped out, he grabbed his rifle, slinging it over his shoulder before checking his handgun at his side. He checked his side bags for anything that might be useful, but came up empty. He patted his horse on the side.
All right, girl. Gonna need you to hang tight for a bit, he cooed. You're gonna hear some noise, but don't get scared. I'm coming back.
The horse neighed but was generally calm. He gave her one more soft pat before turning towards the neighborhood. He pulled off his rifle, looking through the scope of the situation. There were about 3 dozen trailers that were in lines of 4, starting about 50 yards off of the highway and stretching back several streets. The regular houses were on the back lot, with half a dozen of them stretched out. While there were plenty of places for him to hide, he knew it also meant there were plenty of places for zombies to hide as well. He scanned the area carefully, seeing a few dozen zombies moving about down the streets, with only half a dozen or so on his side of the line of trailers.
We'll just go dead center and see what we got, he murmured, and slung his rifle over his shoulder, drawing out a large hunting knife as he started jogging towards the center of the neighborhood. There were 2 trailers that shared a yard, with there being about 15 yards of space between the 2 structures. There were 2 zombies in the yard, both of them enamored with the rusty swing set sitting dead center. One of the ghouls had become entangled in the chain, drawing and keeping the attention of the other one. Zane looked past them towards the road, finding a few ghouls in the street milling about, not paying any attention to him or the swing-set corpses. He struck quickly, coming up from behind the non-trapped zombies, delivering a kill strike to the back of its head and shoving it to the ground. This enraged the other one, clattering the chain about as it reached for food, but unable to break free. This made it easy pickings for Zane, who jammed his knife into its skull, dropping it to the ground. He looked to the road, finding he was still undetected, so he ran to the trailer to his left, away from the highway for a little more cover. He inched out to the corner, giving him a better view of the battlefield. There were a couple dozen zombies within his view, but they were stretched all up and down the road. He could see the highway from there, about 300 or 400 yards from his current position. As he contemplated what to do next, he looked across the street towards the next row of trailers, finding one with a wide-open door and no zombies near it. All right, let's start some shit,
he muttered to himself, and aimed towards the closest corpse. He took a deep breath as he focused on the shambling zombie, in the middle of the road about 40 yards away. When he was finally ready to unleash some chaos, he fired, sending a huge boom through the air and ripping the head clean off the zombie.
Hell yeah,
he murmured, and quickly took aim at the next closest creature, about 10 yards away from the first one. He steadied himself and fired, sending a bullet straight through its eye socket. The moans in the area intensified as everything within a few hundred yards radius honed in on his position. He slung the rifle over his shoulder before running out from cover towards the trailer with the open door. Zane glanced down the road towards the highway. The noise had drawn most of the ghouls in his direction, so he didn't linger, continuing to rush towards the trailer. As he rushed up the stairs, he glanced around him, relieved that there wasn't a creature with eyes on him. He quickly and quietly shut the door behind him before whipping around with his knife at the ready, knowing he might not be alone inside. As he cautiously moved through the double-wide trailer, The moans outside grew louder. Even with that growing noise, he could still hear footsteps within the home, putting him on edge. He came around the corner of the living room, looking down the hallway and seeing the silhouettes of 2 ghouls, one in the hallway and one in the bedroom, the sunlight from the window casting them in shadow. Zane studied them for a moment, calculating the distance they were from each other, determining that he had enough time to strike the first one before the other could reach him. Without thinking too hard about it, he moved down the hallway at a deliberate pace, walking softly as he could so he didn't draw any more attention to himself as he already had. He managed to sneak up on the first one, jamming the blade into the back of its skull, dropping it to the ground in a heap and blocking the hallway. The sound not only agitated the one in the bedroom, but drew out another one from the side that he hadn't noticed. Zane took a few steps back to buy himself a moment to figure out his plan of action, as the 2 monsters were very close together. They shambled towards him, the lead one tripping on the fallen corpse, face-planting into the dingy, blood-soaked carpet. He didn't let the opportunity pass him by, quickly stabbing the creature in the back of the head and then leaping back just in time to avoid the second ghoul falling on him. It landed on its dead friend, allowing Zane to finish the job. He let out a clicking noise, one that was loud enough to alert any zombies inside to his presence, but not loud enough to be heard outside. He was relieved when there was no response. He walked into the kitchen, drawing all of the curtains as he moved to double-checking the security of the front door. He opened the cabinets in the small kitchen, happy to find a couple of bottles of room-temperature water. As he cracked one open, he moved to the side of the trailer facing the road where the zombies were currently marching up. He took up position just off to the side of the window, remaining hidden but able to see out. The front edge of the zombies from the highway marched up, most of them looking confused at their inability to find the source of the noise that drew them up there in the first place.
"Yeah, y'all keep looking,"
he muttered, and took a long sip of water before pulling out his walkie-talkie.
"All right, Chet, I got 'em moving my way. Do what you gotta do, and if they start moving back toward you, I'll correct 'em."
He turned the volume to low and set it on the table beside him before settling in to watch the mass shamble on. Chapter 7. Jackie, Chet, and Travis tied their horses up to a nearby fence post that was about 100 yards from the traffic jam. They departed and began walking up slowly, watching as the zombies moved away from the wrecks. Well, most of them. A few of the ghouls were trapped inside the vehicles, and several more were enamored with them, refusing to follow the mob away. The trio made it up to a small single-story brick building that was just across from the traffic jam. Chet led them up, with Jackie behind him and Travis bringing up the rear and keeping watch behind them. He poked his head out, spotting 8 zombies in the entangled mass of metal that blocked the entirety of the 4-lane road. It wasn't one solid roadblock, but the wrecked vehicles created a kind of rolling maze of metal that was an effective enough zombie trap. The creatures were spread out fairly well, at least, and there were vehicles between them and their voyeurs. "Use your blades," Chet instructed quietly. "Fan out and knock 'em out. Shouldn't be too hard." The 2 others peeked out, seeing the situation and nodding in agreement. Everybody got their knives ready as Chet led them out. The group fanned out, walking with a deliberate but careful pace, trying to stay quiet. The last thing they needed was to draw attention to themselves. Travis was up first, walking to his right and hopping up onto a smashed sedan. 2 ghouls banged on the window, trying to get inside to the trapped family of zombies thrashing about inside, trying to get out. They didn't see or hear Travis coming, and he smacked the blade into the tops of their heads, one after the other in quick succession. Jackie had a similarly easy time taking down 3 creatures trying to get into an overturned minivan. While she didn't have the luxury of being on top of another vehicle, she was able to silently sneak up behind them. With 1 quick stab followed by 2 more, the trio of ghouls were no longer a threat. Chet strolled up to the 2 creatures that were his target, attempting to get into a sedan that was on its roof. Both were on the ground on all fours,
smacking against the glass, making them easy prey. Once the creatures were knocked out, the trio came together in the middle of the road, surveying the situation. The wreck was a massive one, stretching across all 4 lanes, and for a good 30 or 40 yards. It was a near solid wall towards the north end. "How the hell are we clearing all this, bro?" Travis asked, waving an exasperated hand.
"We don't have to clear all of it, just enough for the mob to get through,"
Jackie pointed out. Chet nodded. "Jackie's right. This isn't going to be as bad as you think," he said. "Famous last words," Travis muttered. "First things first, we need to find a truck that can push the overturned cars," Chet said. His brother nodded. "I'll start looking for that," he said. "Looks like there's a couple of potentials down the road there." "Get moving. Just watch yourself," Chet replied with a nod. "Could be more of those things around." Travis nodded and jogged off as Jackie turned to Chet.
"What do you want me to do?" she asked.
He thought for a moment, surveying the mass of metal on the roadway. "You feel comfortable pushing a car?" he asked.
She shrugged. "As long as it isn't too far, I can handle it," she said.
"Okay then," Chet replied, motioning as he spoke. "While he gets a truck ready to go, you and I are going to start at the north end of the pileup. If the car's empty, we pop it into neutral and get it moving off the road. Don't worry about stopping them once they're off the road, just let them roll." Jackie nodded, then cocked her head.
"And if there are zombies in the car?" she asked.
"Just let them be," Chet replied, waving a hand. "Let's get the low-hanging fruit first, and then we can worry about the more difficult cars. If we get chased out of here, I just want to make sure we get as much done as we can."
"All right, let's do it,"
she said, extending her fist. Chet smirked and responded with a fist bump, and there was something beautiful and ridiculous about a cowboy and a pock-runk girl exchanging such a gesture. She stifled a laugh, as becoming friends with a cowboy hadn't exactly been on her life bingo card. Chapter 8. Bo rode his horse south well off of the road, continuing to glance over at the smattering of ghouls on it, slowly making their way north. It wasn't anything the group couldn't handle, but it was still concerning. There was another neighborhood coming up, and he decided to check it out and see if he could set up a noisemaker to pull zombies that way and buy them a little more time. He stopped by a fence at the house furthest away from the road, tying up his horse. He hopped off, leaving his rifle in his gear bag and only carrying a knife and a handgun. The neighborhood was similar to the one up by the crash site, a few streets worth of trailers with some low-end real houses near the back. Before he got going, he pulled out his walkie-talkie, bringing it to his mouth. "Hey, boss, you copy?" he asked. Chet came back quickly. "What you got, Bo?" he asked. "You got about 30 or 40 of those things headed your way, but they're slow-moving and spread out pretty good," he reported. "Not much of a threat, just something you need to be aware of." "Good to know," Chet replied. Bo nodded. "So, how's the job looking?" he asked. Hour and a half, Chet said. "Maybe more if we keep running into zombie-occupied vehicles." "Okay," Bo replied. "I'm going to figure out how to set up some sort of noise lure down here so we can focus up there. Then I'll be back. Shouldn't be more than 20 minutes. "Just be careful," Chet said. Yeah, you worry too much," Bo drawled. "Out." He put the walkie-talkie away and drew his knife, walking into the neighborhood. There were a few zombies wandering the far southern end who weren't taking any notice of him. They were all shambling back towards the highway, which he found a bit odd. When he made it up to the next street, he looked down and paused. There were zombies, or what was left of zombies, laying in the roads and yards. About 24, all struck down. He surveyed the area, unsure of what to make of it. "Wonder how long they've been here," he thought. "Maybe somebody fought their way out of Cactus." He kept walking, looking ahead as he came up the next street. He stopped in his tracks at the sight of a few more corpses lying on the ground the next block up. They were about 20 yards away, but he was close enough that he could see the blood still oozing out of fresh head wounds. He froze, fear washing over him like a bucket of ice water. His fight-or-flight instinct firmly kicked in, 100% in the flight position. He didn't bother going any further towards the road, simply turning and running back towards his horse. He made it one single step before he realized he was in trouble. 2 men stood there, donning jeans and black leather biker vests adorned with the Knights of Dumas logo.
"Fellas?"
Bo said, his voice a bit higher than usual. They didn't respond, simply patted tire irons into their palms, sweaty muscles bulging with the movement.
"Okay, good talk," Bo said, and reached down for his handgun.
Before his fingers could even brush the holster, a shotgun round chambered too close for comfort, making him freeze. He glanced over his shoulder, finding another biker walking towards him, about 15 yards away, shotgun aimed. Bo kept his knife hand in front of him, pulling it towards his stomach to keep it out of view.
"You ain't as dumb as you look, boy,"
the shotgun-wielding biker drawled.
"Now you get that other hand up, too."
Bo looked down the street, finding no other bikers or zombies, just a 30-yard sprint to the next trailer. He looked back to the shotgun biker, still walking towards him.
"Get him up, or I'm putting you down,"
the enemy warned. Bo forced himself to stop thinking and start acting, because if he didn't do something drastic, these guys would rip him apart, especially if they realized he was from Dalhart. In one single motion, Bo flung the knife back towards the shotgun biker while taking off at a sprint towards the space between the 2 closest trailers. The blade flew through the air, smacking against the biker's chest, landing flat against him. While the toss didn't cause any bodily harm, it was successful in forcing his opponent to recoil at it being thrown at him. That moment of distraction caused him to squeeze the trigger, sending a shotgun blast into the air. The biker just stood there, stunned for a brief moment, and it was a long enough moment that Bo was more than halfway to cover before he chambered another round.
"Cut him off!"
he barked, and aimed, firing wildly. The buckshot flew towards Bo, the overwhelming majority of it missing, but several pellets managed to find his back and right shoulder, causing him to wince in pain as he got to cover. He stumbled a bit as he made it around the corner, quickly getting back to his feet and running back towards his horse while pulling out his walkie-talkie. He fumbled with it as he pulled it off his belt, trying to click it on. Before he could hit the call button, one of the bikers hit him on the blind side like a linebacker taking out a defenseless receiver. Bo went flying, slamming hard into the ground, his radio flying through the air. The biker who nailed him stood tall, showing off a bit from his monster hit. Bo's guts sank as the biker noticed his walkie-talkie, smirking cruelly as he strolled over and slammed his boot heel down onto it.
"No calling for help now,"
he said with a sneer.
"I'm not the one who needs it,"
Bo said, keeping his tone firm and full of malice. The tone had the intended effect of concerning the biker, who turned around with his eyes wide. Bo pulled the trigger of his handgun, hitting the biker in the chest. His enemy dropped to the ground with a shocked expression on his face, gasping for air. Bo scrambled to his feet, but someone let out a yell from the next trailer up. He raised his gun to fire, but a bigger boom filled the air. Buckshot ripped through Bo's legs, sending him to the ground, screaming in pain. The biker racked another shell as he closed in on the cowboy. Bo groaned as he reached for his handgun that had clattered to the ground.
"You move your hand again, I'm gonna blow it right off,"
the biker warned. Bo knew he was screwed, so he stopped moving, just laying still and trying to breathe through the pain. He glanced down at his legs, finding a couple dozen small pellet-sized wounds bleeding from his now ripped jeans. It wasn't a fatal blow by any measure, but it would be a bitch to walk from now on.
"Is he?"
the shotgun biker asked, and one of the others inspected the man Bo had shot in the chest. He looked up and shook his head, and the shotgun wielder let out a scream of rage, aiming directly at Bo's head.
"A blast to the head would be too good for you,"
he snarled, not pulling the trigger. Bo was relieved that, for the moment, this trailer park wasn't going to be his final resting place. The relief was short-lived, however.
"I'll watch him,"
the shotgun biker said.
You go get Apollo and the others. What are you going to do? The other man figured. Figure out where he came from and why he was sticking his nose in our business, the first one drawled. As the other one began to walk towards the other neighborhood across the highway, he pointed to the broken walkie-talkie on the ground. Looks like he tried to use that, so I don't think he's alone, he warned. The shotgun biker sneered as he snatched up the fallen handgun and walked over to inspect the broken radio. This is some cheap consumer-grade shit, he said. Can't be more than a mile range on 'em. The other biker shrugged. I doubt they're in Dumas with that crowd, he said. They're north of here, the shotgun biker said. Only place they can be. When you get Apollo, tell him to bring everybody. Today just got a lot more fun.
Chapter 9. Chet pulled out his walkie-talkie again. Hey, Bo, you copy? He asked, unable to keep the concern from his voice. It had been 45 minutes since he'd heard from his friend. Still nothing? Jackie asked. Chet sighed. Nothing, he replied. Shall we be worried yet? She asked. He ground his teeth. Worried enough, he said. He looked out at the traffic jam they'd done a pretty good job of clearing out, but they still had about half an hour's worth of work to do. Travis was on the north end of things, pushing an overturned van out of the road as the other two walked down towards the south, where there were still about a dozen vehicles on the road with zombies in them. Zane, you copy? Chet asked.
Give me a minute,
came the strained reply. Zane held the door to the bedroom shut. Half a dozen ghouls on the other side pushed as hard as they could, while he had the strength and leverage to hold them at bay. The door had other ideas. The cheap wooden composite material began to splinter from the weight, the top of the door going first. Zane pushed harder, but the top portion broke clean off, crashing down on his head and bouncing to the side. Zombie arms smacked him in the face, forcing him to lean back while keeping his foot at the base of the door. He looked back to the far end of the bedroom, the window already propped open. He broke away from the door, running for the window as the zombies tumbled into the room, not expecting the resistance to give way. As they struggled to get up, he hopped out of the window, landing on the ground beside another ghoul, who was just as surprised as he was. In one quick motion, he drew his knife, jamming it into the side of the creature's skull. As it fell, he ran to the back end of the neighborhood towards the real houses. There weren't any zombies in the immediate area, as they'd all been behind him. Their attention focused on the half-dozen trailers he'd been in and out of for the better part of the last hour. The noise he'd made, and the thrashing about by ghouls in trailers, had done a good job of keeping their attention away from the noise on the highway. However, he was running out of traps to set as he'd reached the end of the neighborhood. Zane ran over to one of the real houses, trying the front door, surprised to find it unlocked. He made it inside and did a quick sweep of the place, finding it empty. He pulled out his radio.
Sorry about that, boss. Little crazy out here,
he said.
What's up?
We sent Bo south of here to keep an eye on things, and I can't get him on the line, Chet came back.
Zane rolled his eyes.
Knowing him, he probably found a bottle of the good stuff and decided to kick back while we do the heavy lifting, he drawled.
Yeah, I'd like to think that's the case, but something in my gut says otherwise, Chet said.
Zane stiffened, the tone of his friend's voice emanating concern.
You want me to check it out?
He asked.
Yeah, Chet came back. We should be done here in about 30, so even if a few of those things come stumbling back our way, we should be able to handle it.
Okay, I got one more trap to set up, and then I'll head that way,
Zane assured him.
Be careful,
Chet said, and the line went quiet. Zane took a deep breath and got to work. Chet slipped the walkie-talkie back into his belt and looked over to Jackie, who had a driver's side door partially open, allowing for the zombie inside to start pulling itself out while giving her cover. Once its head was in the clear, she jammed her knife into its skull.
You just gonna stand there chit-chatting?
She huffed.
Are you going to give me a hand?
Yeah, sorry, Chet said, shaking his head and walking over to her. He helped her shove the car off of the road, but before it even got halfway down, a deep rumble echoed in the distance. His eyes grew wide and he fumbled for his radio.
Chet?
Jackie asked, fear rising in her voice.
They're here,
Chet said into the radio.
Who's here? She demanded.
The Knights of Dumas, Chet replied. She looked down the road, straining her eyes, and within moments a row of 10 bikes appeared, all of them headed straight for them. One bike led the pack, with a giant burly bearded dude atop it, the rest filling in behind him.
Jackie, get behind that car,
Chet demanded.
If this goes sideways, you get to the horses and ride.
She didn't argue, simply did as instructed. Both her and Chet drew guns as they went around the back of a car for cover, the latter standing. The bikers stopped about 30 yards from them. One by one the engines shut off, and the lead man, likely Apollo, led the group of 10 men forward several yards. One of the bikers behind him dragged Bo from the back of his bike, and he was staggering from multiple wounds in his legs.
Looks like we have some uninvited guests, boys,
Apollo shouted.
How do you think we should greet them?
There were rumblings and hoots from the bikers, but Chet stood his ground, chin firm.
You must be Apollo, he said. Oh, look at that. We have an educated man before us,
the bearded leader bellowed.
I had no idea I was so well known.
He stared at the cowboy for a few moments, as if studying him, and then raised his hand in an aha.
Oh, I remember. You're one of those Dalhart boys, aren't you?
That's sheriff to you, Chet declared. Apollo barked a laugh.
Well, pardon me, almighty sheriff of Dalhart,
he drawled, giving a mocking bow.
But it just occurred to me that we're not in Dalhart, so you're just a bit outside of your jurisdiction. I would say pack up and leave, but I think we both know we're well past that at this point.
Chet had his handgun at his side, and he clicked the hammer back. The sound was loud and distinctive enough that the bikers could hear it, and Apollo's face broke into a sly smile.
2 of you against 10 of us. Not sure that's the road you want to go down there, Sheriff,
he said and snapped his fingers. All of the bikers behind him pulled their guns, cocking the hammers back. Chet glanced down at Jackie discreetly, and she shook her head no.
I'm going to get my people and leave, Chet said firmly.
Oh, is that a fact now?
Apollo said, clucking his tongue.
You really think you're going to take us all out, do you?
I may only get one shot off, Chet declared, but that bullet is coming straight for you.
Apollo grinned, almost as if he could appreciate the bravado of the outmanned and outgunned sheriff. He snapped his fingers again, and the biker holding Bo dragged him staggering up to the front line. His hands were tied behind his back, and his legs were mangled and wet with blood.
Bo,
you okay? Chet asked, brow furrowing. Bo offered him a tired smile.
I'm good,
he said shakily.
Nothing a couple weeks of bed rest and a bottle of whiskey couldn't fix.
Let him go. We'll get out of here, Chet promised. You can have the area.
I don't think so, Sheriff,
Apollo said, shaking his head.
I think we both know we're way past a bloodless parting of ways.
Chet's trigger finger twitched by his side, trying to build up the courage to raise the weapon and pull it. He made eye contact with Bo, his friend's eyes clearly conveying that he knew he probably wasn't going to come out of this situation alive. He gave Chet the slightest of nods. But before Chet could raise his weapon, Apollo sighed.
I'm not exactly the patient type, he said,
raising his own handgun and putting it against Bo's head.
So I'll kick this off.
He pulled the trigger, blowing out the side of the cowboy's head. Chet screamed, raising his gun, but before he could even aim, The rest of the bikers opened fire. He fired wildly, missing everything as Jackie grabbed him, jerking him down behind cover. Bullets riddled the car, ripping through the glass and doors like there were nothing. Both of them ducked behind wheel wells for cover.
"What do we do?"
Jackie screamed. Chet looked underneath the car, finding the bikers slowly marching towards them. He didn't know what the next move was, brain spinning wildly, but luckily one was made for him. The sound of a rifle firing in the distance boomed over the small arms fire from the bikers. One of the leather-clad men fell to the ground shortly after. Chet peeked through the shattered window of the car. Several of the bikers had turned their fire to a trailer in the distance. Apollo motioned for two of them to go investigate. As they ran off, Chet popped up and opened fire, hitting one of the closer men in the chest and dropping him. The bikers returned fire, one of the bullets hitting him in the shoulder. Jackie scrambled forward, ready to launch up to help him, but he motioned for her to stay put as bullets ripped through the car. She readied herself to pop up and fire, but before she could, the roar of a truck echoed from behind them. A second later, Travis sped by in the truck. The bikers all turned their attention towards him, peppering the vehicle with bullets. Travis ducked down to avoid being shot, but managed to keep the truck aimed at the edge of the biker line. Two of the bikers leapt out of the way, but one wasn't so lucky, splattering into the front grille. The impact slowed the vehicle down and caused him to lose control a little bit. He quickly sat up, trying to get the truck back under control, but it was too far gone. He held on tight as the truck spun around, screeching as it went off the road, slamming directly into a telephone pole. Travis's head smacked into the steering wheel as he was flung forward. He tried to focus, but was only able to get up enough to woozily look into the side mirror, making out two bikers with their guns drawn rushing towards him. He tried to reach for his gun, but it was pinned by the seatbelt, which was locked into place. He let out a groan as the bikers reached the open window, two barrels aiming at his head. "You move, you die," one of them said. Travis stopped trying to pull at his gun, just giving a soft nod from his bleeding head as he slunk down in his seat, succumbing to the concussion. Meanwhile, two bikers headed towards Zane's position in the trailer. He saw them coming, popping up in a window to fire a shot in their direction, but he was forced back behind cover when they engaged in covering fire. The bikers rushed into the trailer, the lead one being a big, burly dude, lowering his shoulder and crashing right through the cheaply made front door. He hit the ground hard, and his buddy came running in, darting across the living room and firing a couple of shots towards the bedroom that Zane was hiding in. He blindly returned fire, missing entirely.
"Just come on out now, boy," the biker cried. "This ain't gonna be good for you."
"Why don't you come and get me, biker asshole?"
Zane bellowed, firing off another rifle shot. He hit the wall next to where one of them had taken up cover, and the two bikers exchanged some hand signals. One of them barreled down the hallway, the other laying covering fire, forcing Zane back into the bedroom. He startled as a biker burst through the door and raised his rifle, but he wasn't quick enough. The biker ran across the room, lowering his shoulder, driving it right through Zane's thick body, catching his gut. The impact knocked the wind out of the cowboy, and the two of them smashed through the window of the trailer. Zane landed hard on his back, the biker's weight falling square center on his body. The sound of ribs cracking filled the air, but it was quickly replaced by moans of zombies that were coming around the corner. It was just a trickle, maybe half a dozen, but there were more moans in the distance, attracted by the gunfire and commotion going on. The biker saw it as well, getting up from Zane and standing over him, the closest being 10 yards away and closing fast. "You're going to wish I shot you, boy," he said with a sneer, and got down on one knee, punching the cowboy in the face. He smacked him again in a valiant effort to incapacitate Zane enough to get eaten by zombies. "Y'all killed my brother when we paid you a visit, and now it's payback time." The biker reared back to punch him again, but Zane gave him a bloody smile, making him pause.
"Tell your brother I said hi,"
the cowboy said, aiming his handgun at the biker's nether regions and pulling the trigger. The bullet ripped through flesh and denim, sending the biker writhing on the ground in pain. Zane struggled to pull himself up to make his getaway, moving as fast as one of the zombies now approaching his wounded opponent. Zane looked back as the zombies descended on the biker, sickening screams filling the air as flesh was ripped straight off the bone with rotten teeth. He relished in the enemy meeting a grisly end, but he didn't make it too much further before the other biker emerged from the trailer and lunged for Zane, plunging a knife into his gut. He held the cowboy up, whispering in his ear,
"I could kill you, but I'm going to let them do it."
He twisted the knife before shoving him to the ground, and Zane shakily tried to raise his gun. But the biker kicked it away.
"Don't even think about it."
He looked over at his fallen friend who was being eaten alive and aimed his own gun, shooting him in the head to prevent him from coming back as a runner.
"Rest easy, brother," he said.
As he ran off to join the others, Zane laid on the ground, bleeding profusely from his wound and near blind from pain. He was losing life quickly, and he knew it. He looked back at the zombies who had lost interest in the lifeless biker corpse and shambled towards their new meal. Him. He spotted his gun a few yards away and began crawling towards it. The moans and footsteps grew closer, pushing him to move faster towards his fallen weapon. Just as the lead zombie was on him, his hand touched metal. He rolled over and fired, hitting the ghoul in the head. He looked back towards the side of the trailer at easily a dozen zombies coming around. He knew he was too weak to make an escape, and even if he could, the bikers would just put him down. The thought of being eaten alive didn't appeal to him either, so he did the only thing he could.
"Sorry, boss. I tried,"
he said, and put the barrel to his head. He closed his eyes and pulled the trigger, ending his suffering and preventing a whole lot more. The biker who'd taken down Zane walked back to the group, which was down to 7, including Apollo. They'd flanked the car where the other 2 had been hiding, but now surrendered.
"Gunman?"
Apollo asked.
"Taken care of,"
the biker said gruffly. His bearded leader cocked a brow. "You alone?" he asked.
"Yep,"
the biker replied, and jerked a thumb over his shoulder.
"I do have a fan club, though."
Behind him, a dozen zombies shambled towards them, with no telling how many were on their heels. Apollo grinned.
"Break out, Betsy," he said.
His subordinate grinned as he walked back to the bike, opening up the side bag and pulling out a high-end assault rifle with a collapsible stock. He flipped the stock out as he walked back to his leader, handing it over. Apollo admired it for a moment before flipping open the red-dotted scope, looking through it towards the mob. He didn't hesitate once he found his target, quickly popping off round after round, ripping through the heads of the ghouls and dropping them to the ground. It only took several seconds before the immediate threat had been eliminated. Despite being a burly biker, he was a hell of a shot, not something Jackie would have pegged him for. Of course, she was a lot more concerned with what was about to happen to them at the hands of these assholes. Their captors brought them around to the front of the bullet-ridden car, as another biker dragged Travis over from the wrecked truck. "Is he alive?" Chet asked, voice firm but hoarse.
"For the moment,"
Apollo cooed.
"But I'd be more concerned about yourself if I were you."
"What do you want to do with them?" one of the other bikers asked, and the bearded leader paced back and forth, stroking his chin as he clearly pretended to contemplate the question.
"On the one hand, having a sheriff hostage could be useful,"
he said, tapping the side of his massive gun.
"On the other hand, we all know what he did to our people when we tried to get Axton out of jail."
Chet raised his chin. "You're lucky I didn't kill more of you assholes," he said.
"Coulda, woulda, shoulda," Apollo said, chuckling. "You know, if you just kept your mouth shut, you might have just lived through this. But instead—"
He grabbed Chet by the collar, throwing him down on the ground.
"I'm going to let my boys have some fun with you."
He let out a loud whistle and several of the bikers leapt forward, stomping on the sheriff with their boots.
All Jackie could do was watch in horror as they kicked the hell out of him, listening to his bones crack and groan beneath their feet. They took turns stomping on his head once he stopped moving, the skull fractured and bleeding as they caved it in. With such brutal impacts, she didn't think that even if he was still alive, he could come back from this. "So, what are we doing with the girl?" one of them asked, licking his lips. A second one wiped a blood splatter from his cheek and shot her a lewd grin. "Oh, I have a few ideas of what we can do with her," he drawled. Her heart pounded in her ears, and she suddenly realized that Chet and the other cowboys had been the lucky ones. She recoiled from the leering biker's hands, and laughter erupted from the group. "Oh, we got a fighter," one of them said as she backed away. "That's going to make it even more fun."
"Cut it out,"
Apollo snapped, and all the men froze.
"That kind of shit may have flown under previous leadership, but we ain't doing that. Besides, if your old lady knew what you just said, she'd curb stomp you worse than we did to the sheriff."
The leering biker shriveled immediately, backing away from Jackie as if she'd burned him. The biker behind her wrapped an arm around her torso, bringing the cold metal of a knife to her throat. "I can end it quick if you want," he offered, and Jackie stayed as still as she possibly could, unsure of how Apollo would answer. He continued thinking as he glanced between her and Travis, and she realized how helpless she was, her fate in his hands like this. A devious grin crossed his malicious face, and he snapped his fingers, motioning to the knife.
"I have an idea," he said.
The biker handed over the knife, and even though he wasn't touching her anymore, Jackie knew there was no use in trying to run or fight these guys. Apollo held all the cards, and everyone knew it. He held up the knife, threatening but not touching her with it, leaning down so they were eye to eye.
"You answer me truthfully, understand?"
he asked. She swallowed hard and opted to nod other than speak. He accepted that, continuing.
"You're not from Dalhart, are you?"
She shook her head.
"Then what are you doing with these cowboys?"
he asked. She cleared her throat.
"My friends and I got there yesterday,"
she said shakily.
"We were running from a mob of those things coming from Amarillo. They asked for my help, so I gave it."
He cocked his head.
"So, you don't care about them or their town, then?"
he asked.
"It's just a meal and a place to lay my head," she replied.
He waited a beat and then seemed to accept her answer, standing up.
"Good. You're lucky I believe you," he said. "It's one of only 2 reasons that you're going to walk away from this."
She tried not to sag with relief.
"What's the other reason?"
she asked.
"You're going to deliver a message,"
Apollo said with a grin.
"You saw what we did to the sheriff and his friends here. We're going to take his other friend with us, and you're going to tell whoever is left in that pissant town of his that this area is off limits. It's my territory. If anybody comes within a mile of this place or Dumas, then I will burn their town to the ground. Can you do that for me?"
She hesitated for only a second before nodding.
"And you're going to make sure they believe me, right?"
he asked, voice forceful. She nodded harder.
"Yes, absolutely," she said. "I'll make sure they understand you mean business."
She knew she sounded too earnest, quivering as he pointed the knife at her.
"That didn't sound too convincing," he teased,
but threw her a wink.
"But you're lucky I'm the hopeful type."
He nodded at the biker behind her, and suddenly her world flipped as he grabbed her and shoved her down onto the hood of the car. Jackie shrieked and flailed, confused. He'd said he was letting her go, and that they weren't going to hurt her. So what the hell? Apollo grabbed her arm and held it still, rapping on her knuckles with the knife as she balled her hand into a fist. He leaned down so that his mouth was hot against her ear.
"You either spread your fingers out,
or I start cutting at the wrist," he snarled. She whimpered but did as she was told, extending her fingers out and squeezing her eyes shut. He didn't hesitate. The pain exploded from her pinky finger, shooting up her arm. She screamed, the weight on her back suddenly gone, and she staggered away, clutching her now mutilated hand to her chest. Apollo snatched a handkerchief from his pocket and tossed it at her with a smirk. "You get going now," he said, his tone mocking, "because I'd hate for you to get caught up in that mess." The moans from the neighborhood rose as if on cue, and Apollo let out a loud whistle. He motioned to his crew and everybody headed back to their bikes, one of them securing an incredibly woozy Travis to the back. Apollo blew her a kiss as they turned tail and rode off, and Jackie allowed a single sob to rack her throat before she looked down at her hand. She realized she had the handkerchief balled in her other fist, and she quickly pressed it against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding from where her finger had been just seconds ago. She looked down at Chet, his body completely still now. She leaned down, shakily putting the fingers of her good hand to his neck, but there was no pulse. She stood in the middle of the road, pressing on her throbbing wound, listening to the ever-growing zombie moans growing louder and louder with the panic in her chest growing bigger and bigger. Her options were limited, very limited. She stared at the sky. Now what?